From seat 13F to Valkyrie, the call sign that stopped F-22 pilots cold. The hum of the airplane engines was a constant, familiar background noise, almost like a lullaby that tried to soothe the passengers, many of whom were lost in their own thoughts or looking out the window at the sprawling landscape below. Emily sat quietly in her seat, 13F, gazing out at the endless stretch of clouds, her mind occupied with a swirl of thoughts. She had just finished a week-long business trip in Los Angeles and was heading home to her apartment in Denver. It was the usual routine, another business meeting, another opportunity to prove herself in the aerospace industry. But today, as the plane climbed higher into the sky, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something about this flight was different. Emily had always loved aviation. It wasn't just the science of flight or the mechanics of aircraft that fascinated her. It was the feeling of freedom, the way a plane could soar through the sky with such precision and grace. She had always dreamed of being a pilot, but that dream had seemed too distant, too far removed from her reality. Growing up in a small town, she had never imagined that she would one day be involved in something as high-tech and prestigious as the world of military aircraft. Yet here she was, an aerospace engineer working for one of the biggest companies in the industry, surrounded by people who shared her passion but had far more experience. They were the ones who designed and built the machines that flew higher and faster than anything the average person could imagine. But for Emily, it was always about the people who flew those machines, the pilots. To her, they were the true stars of the sky. As she sat in seat 13F, her thoughts drifted to one aircraft in particular, the F-22 Raptor. It was the pinnacle of modern fighter jet technology, a marvel of engineering that could fly faster than the speed of sound, dodge radar, and outmaneuver anything in the sky. The F-22 was known for its stealth, its agility, and the incredible skill of the pilots who flew it. Emily had worked on several projects that contributed to the Raptor's success, but she had never been close to the action. She had seen the jets up close during test flights, heard the stories from the pilots who came through the company, but it always felt like an untouchable world, one that she could only admire from a distance. Emily's career had been built on the shoulders of these massive machines, and while she had been part of some groundbreaking projects, she had always yearned for something more. She wanted to be in the cockpit, feeling the rush of adrenaline as a jet soared through the air, pushing the limits of speed and control. But those were just dreams, things that only pilots could experience, and Emily was not a pilot, or so she thought. As the flight continued, the plane's announcement system crackled to life. Emily barely paid attention at first, her eyes still on the clouds outside the window. But then she caught something in the announcement that made her sit up straighter, her mind suddenly alert. "We apologize for the brief interruption," the pilot's voice said. "We've received a high-priority communication. Please remain seated and await further instructions." High-priority communication. Emily frowned, confused. It was rare for commercial flights to be interrupted like this. She glanced around at the other passengers, but no one seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary. The flight attendants, however, seemed a bit more tense. One of them moved quickly down the aisle, her phone pressed to her ear, whispering something into it. Emily's curiosity piqued, but she didn't want to make it obvious that she was eavesdropping. She couldn't help it, though. She leaned slightly forward in her seat, trying to catch any more details. For a moment, the plane felt different, not quite tense, but definitely on edge. Emily felt a slight thrill of excitement mixed with confusion. What was going on? Was this some kind of emergency? And why did it seem like no one was saying anything? The usual calm and professional atmosphere had shifted, and Emily couldn't help but wonder if this was going to be more than just a routine flight. A few minutes later, the flight attendant returned to the front of the cabin, her face a little more relaxed, though she still seemed a bit distracted. She made another announcement, a brief apology for the earlier disruption and assurance that everything was fine. But Emily wasn't convinced. Something felt off, and it wasn't just the oddity of the situation. The mention of high-priority communication had stirred something inside her, something deep within her that wasn't easily explained. As the plane cruised at altitude, Emily's thoughts wandered back to the world of military aviation, specifically to the F-22. She couldn't help but wonder if somehow this high-priority communication had anything to do with the fighter jets she admired so much. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe not. But the idea that something related to military aviation was happening so close to her was too much for her to ignore. Her curiosity was impossible to shake. Emily pulled out her phone, pretending to check emails, but in reality, she was Googling everything she could about F-22 pilots and high-priority missions. As she scrolled through the pages, something caught her eye. She read about Valkyrie, a call sign used by one of the most elite F-22 pilots, a woman who had made a name for herself in the military aviation world. The more Emily read, the more intrigued she became. The Valkyrie pilot had a reputation for bravery and precision, and she had flown some of the most dangerous missions imaginable. Emily had heard of her before, but it had always seemed like a distant world. Could it be? Could this high-priority communication have something to do with Valkyrie? Emily wasn't sure, but the thought was enough to keep her on edge for the rest of the flight. As the hours ticked by, she couldn't help but feel that this was more than just another flight. This could be the moment that changed everything. Emily's heart raced with excitement. She was about to learn more than she ever imagined about the world of military aviation, and who knew? Maybe this was just the beginning. The plane began its descent into Denver, and Emily took one last look out the window. The sprawling city beneath her looked peaceful, serene, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. She wasn't sure if it was fate, coincidence, or something more, but as the plane touched down and the seatbelt sign flickered off, Emily knew that this was the start of something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. The plane's wheels touched the ground with a soft thud, signaling the end of the flight. Emily leaned back in her seat, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She hadn't been able to shake the excitement and uncertainty that had built up during the flight. There was something about the high-priority communication that had piqued her curiosity. She was almost certain it was tied to something bigger, something connected to the military world she admired from afar. As the plane taxied to the gate, Emily glanced around the cabin. The passengers seemed completely unaware of the strange interruption during the flight. Some were flipping through magazines, others were on their phones, while a few were simply lost in their own thoughts. The flight attendants were a bit more animated now, chatting quietly among themselves as they prepared to greet the arriving passengers. They seemed more relaxed than before, but Emily noticed the subtle glances they exchanged, as if they were still processing whatever had happened during the flight. Emily stood up to retrieve her bag from the overhead compartment. Her mind was racing with questions. Who was the pilot with the Valkyrie call sign? What did she have to do with the mysterious communication? Emily had read about Valkyrie online, but there was so little known about her. The military kept everything related to her career tightly under wraps. All she knew was that the Valkyrie call sign had once belonged to a highly skilled F-22 pilot, and now, after a serious accident, it was assigned to someone else. But how did this all connect to her? Why had the call sign been mentioned on a commercial flight? It was all so bizarre. Emily had worked on aircraft technology for years, but she never imagined she would be caught up in something this mysterious. As the plane came to a stop at the gate, the seatbelt sign blinked off. Emily gathered her things and made her way toward the door, still lost in her thoughts. She stepped off the plane into the cool Denver air, the familiar scent of the city greeting her. She was glad to be home, but a part of her still couldn't shake the strange feeling that something important had just occurred, something that was far from over. She made her way to the baggage claim area, waiting for her suitcase to appear on the carousel. It was a small airport, and the luggage pickup area wasn't too crowded. She spotted her bag and grabbed it, but before she could leave the airport, a man approached her. He wasn't in uniform, but there was something about him that immediately made her feel uneasy. He was tall, with short dark hair and a serious expression. His eyes scanned her face as if he recognized her from somewhere. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Are you Emily Bradford?" She froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. How did this man know her name? Was he a fan of her work? She had worked on several public projects, but she didn't think anyone would be tracking her flight. "Yes," she replied cautiously, trying to hide the wariness in her voice. "I'm Emily. Can I help you?" The man nodded and gave her a polite smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "We need to talk," he said simply. "It's about a matter of national security." Emily's heart skipped a beat. National security? What could she possibly have to do with that? She wasn't involved in any covert government work, and she had no connections to military operations. She was just an aerospace engineer, a civilian with a passion for aircraft. But the seriousness in the man's eyes told her that this was not something she could brush off. "National security?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this about?" Without answering her question, the man motioned for her to follow him. He led her through the airport to a private room. It was a small, windowless space with a desk and a few chairs. The air felt thicker in here, like something important was about to happen. Emily's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was going on. Why had he singled her out? She had been on hundreds of flights, but this was the first time something like this had happened. And then there was the mention of national security. What was so urgent that she needed to be involved? The man motioned for her to sit down, and she did, still trying to keep her composure. He sat across from her, pulling out a folder from his briefcase and setting it on the table. He opened the folder and pushed it toward her. "You've been involved in aerospace engineering for several years now, working on aircraft technologies," he said, looking at her over the rim of his glasses. "That's correct, right?" Emily nodded, still trying to wrap her head around the situation. "Yes, that's correct," she replied, her voice steady, though inside she was starting to feel uneasy. The man glanced down at the folder, then back up at her. "You've worked on several projects related to the F-22 Raptor, haven't you?" Emily stiffened slightly. How did he know that? It wasn't something she had made public, but she supposed it could have been found in her professional portfolio. Still, it was an odd thing for someone to bring up out of the blue. "Yes, I have," she said cautiously. "What does this have to do with anything?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid a photograph across the table. Emily glanced at it and felt a chill run down her spine. It was a picture of a fighter jet, a F-22 Raptor, but there was something unusual about it. In the background, almost hidden in the shadows, was a figure. A woman standing next to the jet, her back to the camera. The woman was dressed in a flight suit, but her face was obscured. The call sign, Valkyrie, was printed across the top of the photo. "You've heard of Valkyrie," the man said. "The pilot who carried that call sign." Emily's heart skipped. Valkyrie, she had heard the name, of course. Everyone in the aerospace industry had. But to see her name associated with something so secretive sent a jolt of realization through Emily. The F-22 pilot she had been reading about during the flight was more than just a story. Valkyrie was real, and now it seemed she was part of something much larger than she had ever imagined. The man's eyes locked with hers, his expression hard. Valkyrie was part of a very high-profile mission that was top secret. "You've been selected to assist in a new phase of this project. You've unknowingly been working on technology that is critical to this mission." Emily's head was spinning. She didn't know what to think. She wasn't sure if she was even capable of processing what was being thrown at her. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "You will," the man replied. "But first we need you to come with us. This is bigger than anything you've ever worked on." He stood up and Emily followed suit, still trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. Her heart was pounding, and her mind raced to keep up with the whirlwind of events. From a normal flight in seat 13F to this, an invitation into a secret military operation involving Valkyrie, F-22 pilots, and technology she had helped design. It was all too much, yet here she was, standing on the precipice of something far beyond her imagination. As Emily followed the man through the airport corridors, her mind was racing. The air felt thicker with every step she took, the walls of the airport growing colder and more oppressive. She had no idea where she was being taken or what exactly was happening, but something told her that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The mystery of the high-priority communication and the strange connection to Valkyrie kept swirling in her thoughts, growing more intense with each passing minute. They exited the terminal and made their way to a discreet, unmarked door at the back of the building. The man, who had introduced himself as Agent Daniels, gave a quick glance around before he ushered Emily inside. The door clicked shut behind them, and they entered a small, dimly lit room. The air was cooler in here, and the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound. The room had a utilitarian feel to it, with no windows and only the bare essentials: a desk, some chairs, and a few filing cabinets. It looked like something out of a government building, and Emily felt a sense of unease settle into her stomach. Agent Daniels gestured to a chair across from the desk, and Emily sat down, trying to steady her nerves. Her heart was still racing, and her mind was spinning. What was going on? Why had she been brought here? What did Valkyrie have to do with any of this? And why, out of all the people in the world, had it been her? Daniels sat across from her and opened the folder he had brought with him. He shuffled through the papers inside before pulling out a document and placing it in front of Emily. "This is a classified file," he said, his voice serious. "It's about a project you've been unknowingly involved with for the past few years." Emily blinked, trying to make sense of his words. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaky. "What do you mean I've been involved with a project? I'm just an engineer. I design aircraft components, nothing more." Agent Daniels didn't look up from the folder. "What you don't understand, Ms. Bradford, is that the work you've been doing has been more important than you realize. The technology you've developed over the years has become a critical piece in a highly classified military operation." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and Emily felt the ground beneath her shift. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What technology?" Daniels finally looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "The F-22 Raptor," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The technology behind it, the stealth capabilities, the advanced avionics, the control systems. You've been part of a team that helped refine and advance those technologies, but you didn't know it at the time. It's a black project, completely off the books." Emily's head spun. The F-22, she had worked on components that were used in military aircraft, but she had never been told about the nature of the projects. Her work had always seemed abstract, disconnected from the real-world applications, but now it was clear that her contributions had been woven into something far larger. I don't understand," she stammered. "Why was I kept in the dark?" Agent Daniels leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on hers. "Because it was necessary. The work you did was part of a larger plan, and we couldn't afford to let you know until the time was right. But now, we need you. The technology you've helped create has become crucial to a new phase of the mission, and that's where Valkyrie comes in." Emily felt her pulse quicken at the mention of the call sign. She had learned a bit about Valkyrie during her flight, but hearing the name spoken by someone who was clearly in the know sent a chill through her. "Valkyrie," she repeated. "What does she have to do with me?" Daniels hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Valkyrie is a code name for one of our top pilots. She was part of a classified operation involving the F-22 Raptor. However, she was injured during a mission and has been grounded. We need someone with your skills to fill the gap and assist in the next phase of the operation." Emily's mind raced. "Wait," she said, her voice rising slightly in confusion. "You want me to, what, become a part of the mission?" Daniels nodded. "Yes, but not in the way you think. We're not asking you to fly the F-22 or take part in any combat operations. Your role will be more technical. You'll be working directly with the pilots, including Valkyrie's successor, helping to integrate new technology and refine the systems that you've worked on for years. Your expertise is needed to ensure that the F-22 continues to evolve and stay ahead of potential threats." Emily's mind reeled with the possibilities. This was far beyond anything she had ever imagined. She had worked on military aircraft before, but the idea of being directly involved in something this high stakes, this critical, was overwhelming. I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said, her voice shaking. "I've never been involved in something like this. I don't know if I can handle it." Agent Daniels gave her a reassuring look. "You've been preparing for this your entire career, whether you realized it or not. Your work has been instrumental in shaping the future of military aviation, and now we need you to take that knowledge and apply it in a way that will impact the security of the nation. You have the skills, Emily. That's why you were chosen." The weight of his words settled over her, and she felt a surge of responsibility wash over her. She had always dreamed of being part of something greater than herself, of contributing to the advancement of technology that could change the world. But now, as she sat in this sterile room, facing the reality of what that meant, she wasn't sure if she was ready for the consequences of those dreams. "I don't know what to say," Emily said, her voice soft. "This is all so much to take in." Agent Daniels gave a small nod. "I understand. It's a lot to process. But we don't have much time. The operation is moving forward, and we need your help to ensure its success. You can think it over, but we'll need your decision soon. The mission is too important to delay." Emily sat back in her chair. her mind spinning with the weight of the decision in front of her. She had spent her entire life working toward this moment, building a career in aerospace engineering, and now she had the chance to contribute to something that could shape the future of military aviation. But with that opportunity came responsibility, a responsibility she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. After a long silence, Emily looked up at Daniels. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I'll help, I have to." Daniels smiled, a hint of approval in his eyes. "I knew you would. Welcome to the team, Emily." As the words left his lips, Emily felt a sense of finality settle in her chest. She had made her choice. She was no longer just an engineer working behind the scenes. She was about to be part of something much bigger, something that would change the course of history. And despite her doubts, despite the overwhelming nature of it all, Emily knew she was ready for what was to come. The days after Emily made her decision felt like a blur. The weight of her new role settled on her shoulders, and it wasn't easy to ignore. What she had thought was a small part of her life, an unremarkable career as an aerospace engineer, had suddenly expanded into something vast and intimidating. Emily now understood that her skills were needed for something far more important than she had ever imagined. Her knowledge of aviation technology, particularly the F-22, had made her an integral part of an operation that was bigger than she had ever anticipated. As soon as she agreed to join the operation, Emily was flown to a top-secret military base located deep in the mountains. The journey was surreal, the private jet that whisked her away, the sleek and efficient security procedures, the quiet, professional demeanor of everyone involved. It felt like she was being pulled deeper into a world that had always been out of reach. She had never imagined that the quiet engineer working on the sidelines of the aerospace industry would be standing on a military base, preparing to collaborate with some of the country's best pilots. Upon arrival, she was given a full briefing. It was in a large, dimly lit room filled with monitors and maps. A team of specialists, engineers, military strategists, and flight instructors were waiting for her. At the front of the room was a large digital display showing the latest data on the F-22 Raptor, along with schematics of the upgrades that were being incorporated into the aircraft. Emily took her seat at the table, trying to absorb everything happening around her. She had always worked on components, parts of a larger picture, but now she was thrust into the thick of it. Her work had always been theoretical, controlled, and methodical, but now her role was tangible. She was responsible for ensuring that the technology she had helped develop would function perfectly in live missions. The lead engineer, a man named Jack, turned to Emily as he began explaining the current status of the project. "Emily, we're at a crucial stage. The F-22, with all of its advancements, is being tested under extreme conditions. We've integrated a new radar-absorbing material, new avionics, and upgraded weaponry, and we need someone with your expertise to help fine-tune the systems. The pilots have been trained on these new systems, but we need to ensure that everything works seamlessly before we go live." Emily nodded, her mind already racing as she tried to process all the new information. This was a world she had never truly imagined, even though she had always been fascinated by military technology. The reality of it, the real-world applications of her work, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Emily worked alongside the pilots and engineers. She was often in the hangar, surrounded by the F-22 Raptors, watching the pilots prepare for their missions. Each time they suited up in their flight suits, checked their helmets, and ran through their pre-flight checks, Emily felt a deep respect for what they did. These pilots were not just soldiers, they were part of an elite group, the best of the best. She knew their job was dangerous, and she admired their focus and commitment. One of the pilots, a woman named Sarah, quickly became Emily's point of contact. Sarah was the one who had inherited the Valkyrie call sign after the original pilot was grounded. She was tall, strong, and incredibly focused, with a natural confidence that came from years of training. Sarah's job was to test the new systems that Emily and her team had developed, and it wasn't long before Emily found herself working closely with her. The first time Sarah spoke to Emily, she was on a test flight, communicating through the radio. "Emily, I'm seeing some interference with the new radar systems. I need you to check the frequency range and make adjustments." Without hesitation, Emily walked over to the team of engineers, relaying Sarah's feedback. They quickly got to work adjusting the system, running through a series of tests to pinpoint the source of the interference. It was moments like these when everything came together, when the technology she had helped create was being put to the test in real time, that Emily felt a true sense of purpose. She wasn't just working on a theoretical model anymore. She was actively involved in shaping the future of military aviation. But as the days went on, Emily began to realize how high the stakes were. The military operation she was now a part of was not just about testing systems and improving aircraft. It was about ensuring the country's defense capabilities were prepared for anything. Emily had spent so much time in the lab, in the quiet comfort of research and development, that she hadn't fully understood the real-world importance of her work. Now every adjustment she made, every system she fine-tuned, could mean the difference between success and failure in a high-stress, high-risk mission. One evening, after a particularly long day of testing, Emily sat alone in the break room, reflecting on everything that had happened. The walls of the room were lined with old military posters, and the faint smell of coffee lingered in the air. Her mind was still buzzing with the day's work, the new radar systems, the avionics testing, the endless adjustments to the F-22. But now she couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and the other pilots. They had trained for years for this moment. The pressure they faced every day was unlike anything Emily had ever experienced. As she sipped her coffee, Sarah walked in, her flight suit still on. She had just returned from a training mission, and her face was flushed from the adrenaline of the flight. She didn't sit down at first, but instead walked over to the counter and poured herself a drink. There was a brief silence before Sarah spoke. "Hey, Emily," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "I wanted to thank you for all the work you've been doing. Without your help, we wouldn't be able to push the boundaries the way we do." Emily felt a surge of pride, but she quickly suppressed it. "It's nothing," she said, shaking her head. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Sarah said, turning to face her. "It's more than that. You become a part of something bigger. The work you're doing is making all the difference." The sincerity in Sarah's voice hit Emily harder than she expected. It was one thing to hear those words from a colleague, but it was another thing entirely to hear them from someone like Sarah, someone who was living the reality of the mission. Emily had never thought of herself as part of something larger. She had always been just one small piece in a very big puzzle. But now, hearing Sarah's words, she realized that her role was more significant than she had ever imagined. "Thanks, Sarah," Emily said quietly. "I'm just glad to be a part of this." For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they both understood the weight of the situation, the gravity of what they were doing. Emily had never thought of herself as a hero, but in that moment, she realized that sometimes it wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what needed to be done, even if it meant stepping out of your comfort zone and into a world you never expected to be a part of. As the days continued, Emily became more involved in the mission, refining the systems, working closely with the pilots, and ensuring everything was ready for the next phase of testing. But she also began to understand something deeper. Her journey wasn't just about the work. It was about the people she was working with, the pilots, the engineers, the strategists. They were all part of something much larger than themselves. And Emily, once just a quiet engineer, was now an integral part of that world. The air was thick with anticipation as Emily stepped into the command center. The room was alive with activity. Engineers and military personnel sat at their stations, eyes fixed on their monitors, fingers flying over keyboards as data streamed in. The soft hum of machinery and the occasional beep of a system update created an undercurrent of urgency. Emily's heart was racing, but she had long ago learned to quiet the nerves that threatened to rise. This was the moment she had been working toward for weeks. Sarah, the pilot who had become Emily's closest ally throughout the mission, stood by the large display screen in the center of the room, going over last-minute checks for the F-22 Raptors that would soon take off on a critical test mission. The air was thick with tension. Emily watched as Sarah reviewed the new avionics systems Emily and her team had worked so tirelessly to refine. The pilots had been testing the upgraded systems for days, but today, everything had to be perfect. Emily's role was simple: to ensure the technology worked seamlessly in the field under real-world conditions. But the weight of it all, the responsibility, the stakes, was never far from her mind. Emily, can you come over here for a moment? Sarah's voice cut through the noise of the command center, pulling Emily from her thoughts. She quickly walked over to Sarah, who stood beside a large touchscreen monitor displaying the F-22's flight path for the upcoming mission. "What's the status?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling under the surface. "We've got a green light from the systems, but we're still waiting for your final adjustments," Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the screen. "You've made the radar systems almost perfect, but there's still a slight delay when we're at maximum speed. The system should be able to keep up without any lag." Emily nodded. She had anticipated the issue, but hadn't been able to fully test the system under the extreme conditions of an actual mission. "Let's run one more diagnostic," she said. "I'll see what I can adjust before the flight. No room for error today." As Emily worked with the team to adjust the radar system, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had never imagined that her work would lead to something like this, a real-world mission with real-world consequences. But the more she worked with the team, the more she realized just how critical her role was. Every adjustment she made, every small improvement, was integral to the mission's success. The seconds ticked by as Emily and the team worked quickly, making final tweaks and conducting tests. Finally, the system was ready. They had done everything they could to ensure that the F-22 would perform flawlessly under pressure. Now it was time to put it to the test. The room fell silent as the pilots began preparing for takeoff. Emily watched Sarah, who was now suited up and sitting in the cockpit, her eyes focused and calm. The other pilots, too, were preparing for the mission, each one aware of the risks involved. But Emily could see the confidence in their eyes, the way they moved with purpose. These were the best pilots in the world, and Emily knew that everything she had worked on, everything she had contributed, would soon be put to the ultimate test. The sound of engines roaring to life broke the silence. Emily stood at the back of the command center, watching as the F-22 Raptors taxied toward the runway. Her heart raced with every passing second. This was the moment. There was no turning back now. The planes lifted off one by one, soaring into the sky. Emily's eyes never left the screen that displayed the aircraft's flight path. The radar system she had helped design flickered to life as the planes climbed higher, their speed and altitude increasing with each passing second. Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her as the systems performed flawlessly, the data on the screen confirming what she had hoped for. But just as she began to relax, a sudden alarm went off, its shrill sound piercing the air. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she looked at the screen. One of the F-22s was off course. A red warning light blinked, and the pilot's voice crackled through the radio, sounding strained. "Command, this is Valkyrie. I'm losing control of the avionics system." "I need immediate support." Emily's stomach dropped. She had worked on these systems for months, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. The technology that had been so reliable in tests was now failing in the field. She quickly moved to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys as she ran diagnostics on the system. "Valkyrie, can you hear me?" Emily called into the radio, her voice steady but tense. "We're running a diagnostic. Just stay calm and follow the backup protocols. We'll get you back on track." There was a brief pause, and then Sarah's voice came through again, much calmer now. "I'm holding steady. I'm going to try the manual override." Emily watched as the flight data updated on the screen, her mind working quickly to calculate the problem. The F-22 was losing altitude, and the systems weren't responding as they should. It was a critical moment. If they didn't act quickly, the plane could crash. The pilots knew how to handle emergencies, but they relied on the technology to guide them. "Status update," Emily said, her voice sharp as she continued to monitor the plane's descent. "We've got the manual override engaged," Sarah replied. "It's working. I'm regaining control, but the systems are still offline. I'm going to have to land this bird without them." Emily's heart raced as she continued to track the plane's descent. This was not just a test anymore. This was a live mission. And Sarah was in the middle of it, relying on Emily's work to guide her back to safety. "Just stay with it, Valkyrie," Emily said, her voice low but determined. "You've got this. We'll get you through it." The next few minutes felt like hours. Emily watched, every second dragging as she waited for Sarah to make her final approach. It was a tense, heart-stopping moment, but the plane gradually came back under control. The systems weren't working, but the pilot's skill and training were enough to get her to the ground safely. "Valkyrie, you're clear to land. Approach runway 3, Emily instructed, her fingers still flying over the controls as she guided Sarah back to the base. The final moments were a blur, but Emily's heart swelled with relief as she watched the F-22 touch down on the runway. The landing was smooth, and Sarah's voice came through the radio once again, sounding calm and collected. "Command, this is Valkyrie. I'm on the ground. Systems are down, but I'm safe. Thanks for the support." Emily exhaled deeply, her hands trembling slightly as the tension finally began to ease. It had been a close call, but they had made it. The mission wasn't over and the systems would need to be fixed, but for now, Emily allowed herself a small moment of victory. As Sarah disembarked from the plane, she walked over to Emily, her expression tired but grateful. "You did it," she said with a small smile. "We made it." "Thanks for everything, Emily." Emily nodded, feeling a wave of pride wash over her. She had helped make this mission a success, even in the face of unexpected challenges. And as the rest of the pilots gathered around to assess the situation, Emily knew that her role in this operation was far from over. There would be more missions, more adjustments to be made, and more challenges to face. But in that moment, Emily realized that she had found her place. She was no longer just an engineer. She was a vital part of something much bigger, something that would change the course of history.